has been 6 years since he died in a New York City jail cell, apparently by his own hand, while the guards who were supposed to be watching him were distracted or asleep nearby. Now, the Department of Justice has just released more than 10 hours of video from inside the Metropolitan Correctional Center where Epstein was being housed ahead of his federal child sex trafficking trial back in 2019. Now, Epstein was accused of running this enormous trafficking scheme that involved finding young girls to give him massages and perform sexual acts, having those girls recruit more teens to be part of the alleged abuse, transporting them on his private jet nicknamed the Lolita Express to places like Little St. James Island, which Epstein owned. And multiple women have come forward over the years saying that Epstein and others sexually assaulted them when they were minors, teenagers. Epstein and his so-called madam and right-hand woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, they have been sued in civil court. They were taken to federal criminal court on the trafficking charges. After Epstein died in prison, the government still went ahead with charges against Ghislaine Maxwell. She was found guilty, serving out a 20-year prison sentence. Now, since Epstein's arrest, and certainly after his death in 2019, rumor and conjecture have been a large part of the conversation surrounding him. Many have claimed that Epstein kept this list of high-profile officials and celebrities that took part in his sex trafficking operation, presumably to blackmail them at a future date. And there were also rumors that Epstein may have secretly recorded encounters between these VIPs and minors, but there's never really been any confirmation of that per se. Now, President Donald Trump and his administration, they promised to release any and all of the information related to the Epstein investigation. But as it turns out, most of it is far too sensitive to ever release publicly, and most of what can be released already has been. Hey everybody, this is another lawn crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? And the research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to all this? Yeah, Morgan & Morgan, they're stepping in to fight to hold these food companies accountable. With decades of experience fighting large corporations, they are ready to stand up for the families who deserve justice. So if your child under 21 has been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes or fatty liver disease, then visit www.forthepeople.com/food or scan the QR code on screen to learn more. I'll tell you what, the conspiracy theories around Jeffrey Epstein's death, they aren't completely baseless. There have always been a lot of questions surrounding exactly what happened that night. According to the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, Epstein tried to harm himself in July of 2019 and was found semi-conscious in his cell with injuries to his neck. He was put on suicide watch, held in an observation cell, but after 6 days was given the all clear by a doctor to go back to a special housing unit where he was supposed to have a roommate. But in August of 2019, Epstein's cellmate was transferred. No new cellmate was put in the room. Guards were supposed to check on Epstein every 30 minutes throughout the night. But the two guards who were assigned to watch him on August 10th apparently fell asleep or were somehow distracted. An investigation found that the two later falsified prison records. So obviously, people have thoughts about this. There was also, by the way, a lack of cameras. 2 cameras in front of Epstein's cell malfunctioned. This was according to the BOP, and a third had footage that was reportedly unusable. You wonder why there's so many theories? Now, guards found him dead in his cell when they distributed breakfast. His body was removed from the scene against BOP policy, and photos of his body, as it was found, were apparently never taken. In fact, I'll tell you what, we spoke with Jeffrey Epstein's brother, Mark, back in January of 2024 here on Sidebar, and at the time, he believed there was something suspicious about his brother's death.
I Dr. Michael Barden to witness the autopsy. The autopsy was performed by the city pathologist. I, as a family member, have the right to have my own pathologist be there and to conduct an autopsy once the body is claimed, if we deemed it was necessary.
And the reason I ask you that is because you just said a second ago you thought that your brother's death was a suicide, you were mourning his loss, but there seemed to be something to indicate to you, I want a second opinion to someone to observe the autopsy, right? What was the reason you thought that?
Well, because in speaking with his attorneys, they had a suicide, and they were sort of surprised that he did it. So we figured let's cover the bases and make sure we have somebody there as well. Because one of the things that's not been out there much is that a few days after death, there was a hearing scheduled to appeal the decision for bail. You know, the first time when he was first arrested, his attorneys asked me if I would participate in his bail. And I said, yes. I said, put up my house in Florida. I knew my brother wasn't a flight risk, and he's my brother. I didn't care. And then bail was denied, which is why he was in jail. And then they were going to appeal the decision for bail. And Jeffrey was putting up a pretty big bail. And they asked me for the appeal if I would guarantee his bail. And I agreed, in essence, doubling it. So there was a chance he might have gotten bail. And that hearing was scheduled in, I think, for the 12th. In a couple of days. So then I'm thinking, if he was going to kill himself, wouldn't he wait to after the bail hearing? Because if he got bail, he'd be living in his house with an ankle monitor and armed guards and cameras, so he wouldn't disappear anywhere. Not that I thought he would try. And then if bail was denied again, then it would be a more compelling argument for him to kill himself if he wanted to. But a few days before the bail hearing makes no sense at all.
So do you have a theory as to what happened here? Because, there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of conspiracy theories, there's a lot of innuendo. Do you have a theory as to what happened here?
Yes, my theory is that this was a targeted assassination.
But in recent months, FBI Director Kash Patel has testified that Jeffrey Epstein took his own life.
Did Jeffrey Epstein hang himself, or did somebody kill him?
Senator, I believe he hung himself in a cell in the Metropolitan Detention Center.
Are you going to release all the information about that?
Senator, we are working through that right now with the Department of Justice.
When do you think you'll have it done, Cash?
I think in the near future, sir.
Like before I die?
Senator, we've been working on that, and we're doing it in a way that protects victims and also doesn't put out into the ether information that is irrelevant for production of the public, such as CSAM.
And when Director Patel says CSAM, he means child sexual abuse material. But I will tell you, despite comments from high-profile figures like a Kash Patel, influencers from both sides of the aisle have continued to push the story that this is all part of a cover-up, right? Just take a look at some of these YouTube video titles from last month. Kash Patel and Dan Bongino portray MAGA. Kash Patel lies about Epstein and Trump cover-up. Kash Patel covers up Epstein tapes on Rogan. So what is the Department of Justice saying now about Epstein's death? And what have we learned from the hours of jail surveillance footage that was just released? Well, to talk about it, let me bring on retired FBI agent Colin L. Schmidt. Colin, thanks so much for coming back here on Sidebar.
Thank you for having me.
All right, your reaction. Announcement from the DOJ. There's no client list, no more videos to be released. Surveillance apparently proving that no one approached Epstein's cell. What do you think?
Well, I just have to go by what was in the letter and actually read some excerpts of it. I actually have it up here, but I believe it's like the third or fourth paragraph. They say we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. And then they go on the next paragraph and say the review confirmed that Epstein harmed over 1,000 victims. So the two statements seem to be a little bit contradictory, because if you have 1,000 victims, how did he harm them? And were there third parties involved in harming those 1,000 victims? And based upon the trial, and in the trial of Giselle Maxwell, it came out that she was somebody who actually recruited victims for prostitution with these alleged third parties. So there just seems to be some contradictory statements in their own letter, which is going to obviously fuel just conspiracy theories, or just going to go wild now.
I don't disagree with that. I'm sure this isn't going to quell the conversation. What's a reasonable explanation for that? How could you have those two statements, working hand in hand with each other?
Without having more information, I was never a part to any of this investigation, even though the entire FBI, there were several field officers involved in gathering evidence. They also said that I think they got gigabytes of video evidence from his house, thousands of pages of documentary evidence, and basically to say that there's nothing there to charge unidentified third parties. And maybe it's a statement that they're saying is no identified third parties in terms of extortion, which they talked about as well. But it just seems like the letter is just adding not even kerosene. I mean, they just dropped basically a whole fuel depot on the conspiracy theorists with this letter, and I think it's just going to cause more problems than it solves.
So before we dig into what the DOJ has to say about alleged evidence that was seized in its investigation of Epstein, I want to first talk about the video the department released showing nearly 11 hours of surveillance video from the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. Now, something I have to note here, this is a separate facility from the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, where Sean Diddy Combs has been since his arrest on federal charges back in September. Sometimes people confuse the two, understandable. But according to the DOJ memo, quote, after a thorough investigation, FBI investigators concluded that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City on August 10th, 2019. The FBI's independent review of this footage confirmed that from the time Epstein was locked in his cell at around 10:40 p.m. on August 9th,